I've noticed that history is a very malleable creature, and there are some things that now never existed. A new NPC history update, if you will, particularly regarding Ukraine. One thing I found very curious with covering this on a day-to-day basis is that history is literally changing before my eyes. It's amazing.
It's quite incredible how that happens nowadays, isn't it?
It's just a fact of life. I believe George Orwell talked about it extensively in 1984.
There's something about the memory hole, wasn't it?
Yeah, whoever controls the past, the present controls the past. Whoever controls the past controls the future. So, how is the past being controlled? Well, there is this fabulous clip that's come out of the BBC post-invasion, which now claims that neo-Nazis in Ukraine basically don't exist and it's a Russian propaganda fantasy. And this guy has a 10-minute clip where he's saying that the Azov battalion are not neo-Nazis. So I thought we'd go through it. So first of all, let's take a brief look at the presenter we're about to see. So let's get his picture up. That's him. I must say, I genuinely think he's one of the more odious personalities in broadcasting. And that might be unfair because obviously I've never met the guy. I've only seen his work like this. But I've been following the work he does. And he comes out with what I call reactive propaganda all of the time. So he's seeing what people are saying online, like us and others, and if it disagrees with the narrative that the BBC wants to shape, he then prepares these short segments with interview and commentary that aim to debunk those inconvenient events, facts, and narratives.
So it's like specially designed to take the talking points that someone like you would be pushing out there. Not that I think you have strict talking points per se, but the points that you're using and deliberately trying to counter them.
Right, absolutely. And for fans of V for Vendetta, I think he's a bit like the voice of fate when it comes to Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
Louis Prothero's character. He also looks quite poisonous, I think, in the briefings he does. I don't know what it is. Again, this is sounding a bit petty, but I would not buy a used car off this man.
I also don't want to sound petty or ad hominem,
Right.
but he does have somewhat of a pointy face. It's quite disconcerting.
It's more that I feel like his face doesn't move. I don't know if he's had cosmetic work done or something, but he just comes across with his eyes being very cold and measured, like he's glaring into the camera. And there's something about it really puts me off. But again, like, don't let that put you off. That's a fairly small point.
Let's not us obviously poison the well for you.
But he's also the founder of the 50/50 Equality Project, if we go to the next one, which calls itself the biggest collective action on increasing representation in BBC content that there's ever been.
The BBC is an unbiased and impartial institution, don't you know, John?
Well, clearly. And so if we go to their methodology, it says here, we count contributors in content. Teams monitor the numbers of contributors in their content to set benchmarks for their chosen diversity measures. They then count regularly as their content is produced to track their progress against the benchmarks. The data is based on the perception of the person counting as to what the audience would see, read, or hear. So, this is a fancy way of saying all the BBC teams count up the number of diverse people you work with, publish it, and rely on social and institutional pressure to ensure that everyone competes to out-diversity each other.
Well, yeah, because if they're going off of the audience, what the audience would like to see, if you're pandering to a particular audience, that being the audience on the left, they're never happy. They're never happy with anything. So, like you say, it's just going to be a case of number will just continuously go up until it is 100% diverse.
Yeah, I'll have you know that the team is 340% diverse because we have diversity in LGBT, we have diversity in ethnicity, we have diversity in religion, and the list goes on.
We have one transgender black female centaur. 100% diverse, baby.
I'm speechless. I'm just
stunning and brave.
Yeah, so stunned, so brave. But anyway, let's get on to his coverage and specifically what you might call neo-Nazi apologia, in the same way that, anyway. So he has this clip here. You'll have seen multiple false claims that Putin and his supporters are making about Nazis in Ukraine. And Putin is making false claims about Nazis in Ukraine. Like, they are dramatically exaggerating the case. I think everyone can agree with that.
Of course.
But we've looked at them in detail, he says. So I've prepared 4 clips from this, which we can go through. So let's go through the first one.
Vladimir Putin has given several reasons for his invasion of Ukraine. This is one of them.
We will be aiming at demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine.
At a recent Putin rally, a banner declared for a world without Nazism. And Putin has described a gang of drug addicts and neo-Nazis who settled in Kiev and took the entire Ukrainian people hostage. But Russia's claims about Nazis in Ukraine are a mix of falsehoods and distortions. For a start, Ukrainians are not being held hostage by Nazis. Their president's Volodymyr Zelensky. He's Jewish. He has relatives who died in the Holocaust. And he's president because he won 73% of the vote in 2019. The main far-right candidate reached 1.6%. And that result is part of a broader shift. In the 2012 parliamentary election, the main far-right party won 10%. In 2014, it was 6%. In 2019, it was 2%. No far-right groups have any formal political power in Ukraine. And based on polling and results, the far-right's much less popular in Ukraine than, for example, the leader of the far-right in France, Marine Le Pen.
Right, okay, so...
I just need to say far-right does not equal Nazi.
I know.
But I just want to throw that out there.
That's the thing. The incredible vagueness of the terminology for far-right and nationalist and Nazi is a weapon which he's using here. Identifying Marine Le Pen with Svoboda is absolutely laughable, and I think that she should actually consider legal action, because that's incredibly defamatory.
Absolutely.
Like the far-right in France and far-right in Ukraine are two very different things. But also, when he talks about distortions and so on, he is right in a lot of the things he says, but it's such a selective narrative. You know, this is why I call this reactive propaganda.
And this is cherry-picking data.
Absolutely, to present a particular case. Let's go to the next clip from 1:30 onward.
In late 2013, under pressure from Putin, Ukraine's then president, Viktor Yanukovych, backed out of a cooperation deal with the EU. Huge protests followed, as would a crackdown. In time, Yanukovych would flee to Russia. This was a challenge to Putin's ability to influence Ukraine, and he retaliated. First, Russia annexed Crimea, then it backed separatists in parts of eastern Ukraine. And this is where the story connects back to the far right, because in 2014, the Ukrainian military was much smaller than it is now. It was struggling, and brigades of volunteers joined the fight against the separatists. Some of them had far-right elements.
Right, so there's a few things there. Again, very, very selective history. He's airbrushed out all parties from this other than Ukraine and Russia. Nothing about NATO, nothing about American involvement or anything like that. Fair enough, he's got time constraints, he's got narrative to push, let that slide. But also, by admitting the Ukrainian army was so weak in 2014, what he's doing is really underlining the fact that Ukraine has militarized tremendously effectively in the last 8 years. Again, due to a lot of the training and weapons and equipment that we've been supplying from the West.
Yeah, I'm sure if this guy just went back over a number of BBC articles, he would probably be able to find all of this information from when it was happening.
He would, definitely. And then he ends on this with Azov, as you can see, that symbol there. Now, what does that look like to you?
If I believe correctly, I'm not that familiar with the symbology, but I believe that sun behind the symbol, it has some ties to Nazi ideology, as far as Callum has told me.
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, there are two symbols here that bear mention. One of them is that so-called sun, which is apparently the Black Sun, which was used by the SS as part of the Nazi occult movement. And the other one is the Wolfsangel sign at the front, which was also used by the SS, but the Ukrainians themselves claim that it stands for IN, as in idea of the nation, and is perfectly harmless and nothing to do with the SS. And many Ukrainians don't see this symbology as being directly connected to the SS, and they say, oh, it's just Cossack symbology, dude.
It's just completely coincidental that we've stacked one Nazi symbol on top of another.
I mean, oops, what can I say?
Oh, what a gaffe, guys.
Right. But this is the other thing, and I'm going to come back to this point as well. If you walked into the BBC offices wearing that, do you think they would be half as charitable as they're being right now?
I question it. I question it.
Let's go to the next clip.
This is the Azov emblem being shown to Steve there. It's a pagan symbol known as Wolf's Angel, and a version of it was used by some SS units in Nazi Germany. Andreas Umland's an expert on Ukrainian nationalism. He's looked at this, writing, the Wolf's Angel has far-right connotations, but it's not considered a fascist symbol by the population in Ukraine. That may be, but back in 2015, Azov acknowledged that some of its fighters held Nazi views. A spokesperson told USA Today that only 10 to 20% of the group's members are Nazis, and he sought to make a distinction, using one fighter as an example. I know Alex is a Nazi, he said, but it's his personal ideology. It has nothing to do with the official ideology of the Azov.
Can you imagine the BBC being this charitable about any other group of Nazis anywhere in the world?
I spoke to the BBC and they said only 10 to 20% of their staff were Nazis. so it's not a problem.
Could you imagine if 10 to 20% of the Trump campaign were Nazis?
Oh God, we'd still be hearing
Or what about the
it.
Conservative Party, for example? No, it's not a big deal, guys. It's just 10 to 20%. Like, seriously. Even this. Look, yeah, okay, he's a Nazi, but we believe in freedom of thought. You know, there's no such thing as the thought crime to the BBC. You could be a Nazi. We'll platform you. That's just your personal view.
I mean, CNN have repeatedly platformed Richard Spencer.
That's true, but then only Richard Spencer.
But then they are ideologically aligned with one another.
They do it specifically to point out to everyone, look, this is what you should hate. So
no, I think it's because CNN like to race bait, and so does Richard Spencer.
There's that as well. They have a lot of common ground in their ideology, which we've probably woken up to a bit on this channel. Let's see the next clip.
Ukraine's armed forces total 250,000 plus 50,000 National Guard. Azov is part of the National Guard with around 1,000 volunteer fighters. It's a tiny fraction of the Ukrainian military. It's also not the same force as it was in 2014.
Azov a ouvert son recrutement.
Azov opened its recruitment to the whole of Ukrainian society, and eventually this radical corps was drowned out by the massive newcomers who joined the regiment because it was an elite unit.
And while the membership was evolving, the founder also left to start a new far-right political party, a party which has failed to achieve any electoral success. But the Azov regiment that he left behind is high-profile and mainstream. This is the view of the Ukrainian government.
The only Nazi elements we have on the territory of Ukraine now are the Russian fascist army.
So, again, it's the standard stuff. We've got like 3 strands of apologia here. One of them is, they're tiny, they're irrelevant, don't worry about them. Another is, and they're not even doing very well, and they're not that popular. And then finally, the Ukrainian government says it's fine, so it's all kosher.
Yes. We've asked ourselves, we've asked a Frenchman for some reason, and we've asked the Ukrainian government, the most authoritative sources on this issue.
Right. And it's just amazing. I just want you to think the next time the BBC or whoever it is banging the gavel against alleged neo-Nazis in some group or whatever it might be, just cast your minds back to this when they're saying that it's only 10 to 20% and that's okay. And then finally this little clip.
The rhetoric is factually wrong. Nazis don't hold Ukraine hostage. They're not launching attacks on Ukrainians. There's no evidence to support this kind of claim.
Most of the Ukrainians hate these neo-Nazi groups and they pray for Russia and for somebody else to liberate Ukrainian society from Nazi group.
Right, so I noticed the BBC tends to report on things like this using a trick where they drag out the least coherent, most heavily accented and objectionable person they can find to represent the side they don't like.
Of course they do. It's like when I referenced CNN with Richard Spencer when these... It's something these people always do. They don't just cherry-pick information. They cherry-pick contributors so they can say, see, we're unbiased. See, we open up conversation for everybody. We've just found this complete nutter on a street corner who agrees with some talking points on the right. Therefore, we're unbiased.
It's kind of like the medium is the message sort of thing. So having said that, like immensely selective history aside, Mr. Atkins does present a narrative on the Azov battalion that could be correct. So we should bear that in mind. They might just be a fringe, unpopular minority. Their Wolfsangel and Black Sun might just be Cossack symbols rather than the SS symbols that everyone else would think they are on site. And this might be a complete nothing burger drummed up by sneaky Russian propagandists. But should we get a second opinion? Here's Time magazine. In January last year, they claimed that Ukraine's Azov battalion is the center of a global white supremacist neo-Nazi ISIS-style terrorist network.
Well, that's a hell of a shift.
I know. So, like, share, recruit, how a white supremacist militia uses Facebook to radicalize and train new members. And they continue. It goes through a little story. It's a 4,000-word article, chunky piece of work. Not going to read the whole thing, but just a few extracts. When they finally rendezvoused, Fuller noticed the swastika tattoo on the middle finger of Furholm, the Azov guy's left hand. It didn't surprise him. The recruiter had made no secret of his neo-Nazi politics. Within the global network of far-right extremists, he served as a point of contact to the Azov movement, the Ukrainian militant group that had trained and inspired white supremacists from around the world, and which Fuller had come to join.
So if this article is to be believed, when we always hear about the media crying about, oh, Facebook and all these places, they're just a network for white supremacists to gather together and to recruit new Nazis. This might be the one time the example is correct.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. Its fighters resemble the other paramilitary units, and there are dozens of them that have helped defend Ukraine against the Russian military over the past 6 years. But Azov is much more than a militia. It has its own political party, 2 publishing houses, summer camps for children, the Azov Youth perhaps, and a vigilante force known as the National Militia, which patrols the streets of Ukrainian cities alongside the police.
Wait, what?
A vigilante force known as the National Militia, which patrols the streets of Ukrainian cities alongside the police.
We've got the Nazi jackboots on the streets. Don't worry, citizen, you're safe.
So we have the Azov Youth, the Sturm Azov. Anyway, unlike its ideological peers in the US and Europe, it also has a military wing, with at least 2 training bases and a vast arsenal of weapons, from drones and armoured vehicles to artillery pieces. And yes, we can confirm that Azov is heavily armed and seems to know what it's doing.
Well, yeah.
Outside Ukraine, Azov occupies a central role in a network of extremist groups stretching from California across Europe to New Zealand, according to law enforcement officials on 3 continents. And it acts as a magnet for young men eager for combat experience. Ali Soufan, a security consultant and former FBI agent who has studied Azov, estimates that more than 17,000 foreign fighters have come to Ukraine over the past 6 years from 50 countries.
That's a lot more than just a 1,000-man strong troop, isn't it?
Isn't it, Mr. Atkins? And I also wonder whether his 1,000 is the post-casualty figure report, since they've been surrounded in Mariupol for over a month. Anyway, the US government was also slow to acknowledge the danger of Ukraine's far-right militias, but by March 2018, the US Congress publicly denounced the Azov Battalion, banning the US government from providing any arms training or other assistance to its fighters. That's interesting, isn't it?
Sorry, these statements, they just seem so ridiculous, and then it just kicks into my head. Oh, the US government. Oh, okay, what, helping Nazis?
Yeah, but we actually have it on footage of British and American troops training these guys.
Oh, okay.
As part of Operation Crucible and so on. Though largely symbolic, the move discouraged all Western military forces, and especially members of the NATO alliance, from training alongside Azov fighters, or indeed having anything to do with them.
I wonder why.
At a hearing of the House Committee on Homeland Security in September 2019, Soufan urged lawmakers to take the threat more seriously. The following month, 40 members of Congress signed a letter calling unsuccessfully for the US State Department to designate Azov a foreign terrorist organization. Azov has been recruiting, radicalizing, and training American citizens for years, the letter said. Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, later confirmed in testimony to the US Senate that American white supremacists are actually traveling overseas to train. Oof.
Big oof.
I know.
Yeah.
The hearings on Capitol Hill glossed over a crucial question. How did Azov, an obscure militia started in 2014 with only a few dozen members, become so influential in the global web of far-right extremism? Time, in more than a dozen interviews with Azov's leaders and recruits, found that the key to its international growth has been its pervasive use of social media, especially Facebook, which has struggled to keep the group off its platform. Facebook is the main channel, says Furholm, the recruiter. In a statement to Time, Facebook defended its recent attempts to deal with the proliferation of right-wing extremists, saying it had banned more than 250 white supremacist groups, including Azov. As they evolve their efforts to return to the platform, we update our enforcement methods with technology and human expertise to keep them off, the statement said. And they continue. But finally, they claim that far-right groups since 9/11 are responsible for nearly 3/4 of the 85 deadly extremist incidents that took place in American soil, which seems like a very doctored statistic.
Of course.
According to a report published in 2017. And finally, in their letter to the State Department in 2019, US lawmakers noted that, quote, the link between Azov and acts of terror in America is clear. Bold statements there, right?
That's very interesting. It's very interesting how all of this has been walked back.
Now, do you feel like we've been living in 2 realities over the last 20 minutes?
I feel I've been presented 2 very different stories.
Exactly. So, and it goes on and on. 4,000 words, like I say, claiming Azov sits at the center of this network, and the authors are clearly trying to pressure Facebook and other big tech companies into swinging the ban hammer even harder at right-wing groups. So when was the mainstream media cathedral lying to us? Was it then, or is it now? In 2021, the day after the January 6th Capitol Hill protest, that's when this Time article dropped. saying everything was neo-Nazi. Neo-Nazis were everywhere, killing people and blowing them up and so on.
4,000 words in that level of research makes me think that was very well timed for something that obviously was so well planned.
The timing is convenient and revealing. An article like this would have taken at least a week to write, probably 2, with interviews and everything. The authors, Simon Schuster and Billy Perigo, must have written it in anticipation of the Capitol Hill neo-Nazi narrative. The far-right white supremacist violence narrative that emerged after January the 6th with suspicious speed. So maybe they're lying to us, and the BBC today has it right. Maybe Azov was never really a big deal. Their multiple Nazi symbols in their flag aren't a representation of who they are or what they believe. It's all just a big misunderstanding, aided by people who want you to think Nazis are everywhere. So Time magazine, the entire mainstream media in 2021, and Vladimir Putin. Or maybe the BBC are lying to us. But Time magazine had it right. There are Nazis everywhere, always have been. Azov is the epicenter of Nazi terrorism, and Ross Atkins' segment is just modern war propaganda. Or perhaps they've both been lying to us relentlessly for years, and the truth sits somewhere outside of their well-curated narratives.
And I imagine that's going to be one of those things that in the future will be very, very difficult to ascertain what truth is out there.
I wonder if Ross Atkins is going to bitterly regret that 10-minute segment he did in a few years' time.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this old video here, The Politics of Watchmen, which has been incredibly popular, so I thought I'd feature it again. So if you want to check that out, do go out and subscribe. Otherwise, if you want to follow Harry and what else he's doing, you can follow him on Getter at Harry Lotus Eater. Thank you and goodbye.